Everybody okay to start then? Thanks all for coming along. The attendance sheet is in the middle there. We can sign it when it's going around. Apologies for absence. We're all here, so there's no apologies for absence. Item 3 then is declarations of interests. Jennifer?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, there's an item on the agenda, which is number 7, regarding the acquisition of the site for the Sixth Form Centre. My advice to the members is that you have a personal interest if you are a council-appointed governor of a comprehensive school in Torfaen, and that's not a prejudicial interest. Councillors Richard Clark and Veronica Crick are council-appointed governors across Aquila Comprehensive School. If I could ask both members, thank you. And Councillor David Daniels and Councillor Amanda Owen are council-appointed governors at Cwmbran High School. Thank you. You'll also have an interest if you're a governor not council-appointed of a school or a close comprehensive school, or have a close personal associate who attends or works at the school. Now, I'm not aware of any interest that fall within this category. Thank you, Leader.
I have a close personal association in that my niece goes to Fairwater High. Sorry, Cwmbran High. Apologies.
Okay, if we're happy to note those and then move on to the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes from the 1st of May. If I take you through those on page 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, and the Welsh language versions on pages 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. Are we all happy to agree those minutes? Agreed. Right, move on to agenda item 5 then, which is update on actions. There's no outstanding actions on the sheets. So everyone happy to move on then to item 6, which is the financial results report on page 17 of your agenda. If I just very quickly introduce this before handing over to Nigel. This is the results of the revenue budget for the outgoing financial year, so 2017-18. And if Nigel talks us through the report, and then I'll make a few comments and then open up for a discussion.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Torfaen, we continue to close our accounts early and accurately, I would say. So obviously they'll be going to audit committee on the 13th of June and then council on the 26th of June for final ratification. But these represent our financial results in management accounting terms, i.e. how we organise ourselves as a council. As the report says, in overall terms, it's a good position for 2017-18. But I would qualify that by saying there are pressures in children's services, there are pressures in Torfaen training, both of which will continue and manifest themselves in 2018-19. So we've got to be mindful of those. I'd also draw out the general fund balance is declining. So I think there's some underlying evidence in 17-18 that things are starting to get tougher, although it's a favourable position. And our ability, shall I say, to generate resource to boost financial resilience is getting less all the time. Section 5 of the report then takes Cabinet through the financial results for 2017-18. As I said, I think it's good overall, and it's quite pleasing overall in terms of the percentage of savings that are achieved that were actually agreed by members, whether they be the original ones or alternative ones. I think that's good. We obviously need to maintain that in the current year. I've mentioned children's services and Torfaen training. The report brings that out in the various sections, as it does the cost of the winter. And it shows you how the weather can cause a big impact, particularly in Rachel's area. In terms of just bringing out of note in education, there's reference to starting to fund the post-16 change management costs by an allocation there from the good position that education are in, and I think that's a real positive. that shows an approach of thinking of things over a number of years rather than just what's in the here and now. Section 6 then takes us through the capital programme, which, again, is largely dominated by 21st century schools. We're obviously starting to come towards the back end of the band A of 21st century schools, and I think the council and you as members should be really proud of band A. It's over 45 million of our own resources have gone into band A, which for a small council to deliver that and achieve that is absolutely significant. And I was sat here when we originally put that financing plan together, and I think I described it as low risk within a very high risk, but as low risk as it can get within a high risk funding strategy. But I think you should rightly be proud of that as a small authority. And obviously there's the first city deal investment referenced in there, our contribution towards that first investment. So perhaps marking a change of how we're moving forward. Section 7 of the report then goes through the financial resilience. I've mentioned that the general fund balance is falling. Service area reserves are still holding up, and certainly education, social care and neighbourhoods have healthy reserves. And I think we're going to have to protect the general fund going forward, and dip into service reserves perhaps a little bit more, because the general fund reserve is reducing. The last part of the reserves part of the report is a reserves policy, and I make the point at the front of that around how reserves should be used. And I mentioned this in the policy seminar. I still think there's much too much narrative, both within the council and outside the council, that somehow reserves are a way to avoid difficult decisions. They are not, and you've only got to look at other councils that are, falling by the wayside. They're there to help you change. They're there to cushion change and cushion the unforeseen, and not for avoiding difficult decisions. And I'm happy to leave it there, Leader.
Okay, just like to thank Nigel for that report, and to Nigel, Dave Lilly and the team for all the work they've done. I think you're right to draw attention to the fact that we have a record of closing our accounts promptly and accurately, but of course modesty prevents you from pointing to the root cause of that, in that we've got good financial processes within the council, and that's a credit to the work that yourself, Dave, and others in that team do. So thank you for that work. I note the tone of the report, really, as you outlined, that things are getting tougher all the time, but at least we've got a set of financial processes and a culture within the organisation that gives us the best possible chance of weathering the storm that's continuing to rage around us. I note the point that you make on reserves, and also the point you make about the fact that austerity continuing makes things tougher all the time, because maybe some of the oil that used to help the budget get by has now been taken out, and the engine's running dry, if I can resist extending the analogy to beyond breaking points. Also the point you make about schools, really, and about 21st century schools. I think we sometimes forget the progress that we've made in the fabric of the buildings that our children are being taught in, compared to perhaps at the start of this century. That's a real achievement from the council, and I speak as someone who came in on the back end of that, so it's not trying to grab credit for myself, it's credit to those who set us along that path many years ago. Any other members want to make contributions before we move to the recommendations? Okay, if I draw your attention to the recommendations then, at 10.1 it's recommended that Cabinet notes the outturn position in respect of revenue and capital accounts of the Council, approves the contributions to reserves as outlined within the report, and reapproves the reserves policy. Have a show of hands on that. That's carried, thank you. If we move on then to item 7, which is the site acquisition for the Sixth Form Centre at Grange Road, Cwmbran, and the grant of the lease to Coleg Gwent. If I hand over initially to Veronica to introduce this item.
Thank you, Anthony. This is really where our 21st century schools start to see the big changes with the sixth forms particularly. which hopefully will open in September 2020 now. That depends very much really on what we decide today. The important date is June the 18th for us. It means today we've got to agree quite a complex set of recommendations, particularly from a suite of interdependent legal arrangements, of which there are 6. We're looking to approve in principle the proposed acquisition of the land from the Welsh Government for the new English medium 6th form. We're also looking, because of that, to enter into an agreement to lease for the centre, and then subsequently grant a lease to Coleg Gwent. And I'm going to pass across to Victor Mavundula, who is at the end of the table here, who will lead you through these very complex arrangements.
Thank you, Councillor Crick. Good morning, thank you, Leader. I'll try and make it as simple as I possibly can. If I may try and set the scene here, we have a situation where we're looking to acquire land from Welsh Government, and then we have Coleg Gwent who will operate the college. So we are entering into relationships with 2 entities, 2 separate relationships essentially. The land that we're looking to acquire is only a third of a larger site, 1.8 acres of a 5-acre site. The previous use of the land is industrial, so there is contamination in there. We have a deadline for the college of September 2020. Now, with respect to the contamination, the most effective way of addressing that is to do it across the entire site. The rest of the site does not have an immediate use at the moment, so our need is more urgent, more immediate, and therefore, in order for the remediation to be done in a cost-effective way, it is best that it is done as part of the works related to the college. And because we have the deadline of 2020, this work needs to start essentially this month. So the proposal is that we obtain a lease from the Welsh Government that allows us to enter into the site to undertake the remediation across the entire site. While that license is running, we'll enter into an agreement for lease with Welsh Government. The reason why we're having the license is because we can't complete the agreement for lease before the 18th of June. If we could, we would dispense with the license. So the license is just a holding position, as it were, until we agree the agreement for lease, which will then incorporate the terms of the license. We then undertake the remediation of the site, for which we already have planning permission. If it happens, very unlikely, that for whatever reason the project did not go ahead, the costs incurred in remediation would be recoverable from Welsh Government. But obviously that's not what we expect to happen. We're expecting this project to go ahead. So once the remediation is complete, under the agreement for lease with Welsh Government, we then undertake the construction of the college. When that is complete, we then actually enter into a lease for 999 years with Welsh Government, for which we'll pay a premium. Currently, the figure that we have, which is in gross terms, is £300,000, and then for the rest of the term, we'll pay £1 per year. That figure is subject to revision because it was arrived at before the level of contamination had been assessed and the costs involved. So when a revised valuation is being prepared at the moment, which means that figure of 300,000 is a maximum, we would expect it to be lower than that to reflect the contamination that's involved. So that's the element involving the Welsh Government. With respect to Coleg Gwent, because we're making this commitment of constructing the college in the expectation that Coleg Gwent will operate the Sixth Form Centre, we need their commitment before we start the construction. So we'll enter into an agreement for lease with Coleg Gwent, which essentially says, on our part we are saying we're going to build a college, and on their part they're saying we'll operate the college if we build it, in simple terms. So when we then complete the construction of the college, we then enter into a lease, with Coleg Gwent for 99 years for them to operate this college. And the skeleton terms of the agreement are within the report. The lease to Coleg Gwent will be for £1 a year, which is less than the market value of the college that we're building, obviously. But that's because if we charge the market value, then this wouldn't be viable for Colley Gwent. Now, in order for us to grant that lease at less than market value, we need consent from the Welsh Government. So part of what is in the report is permission for us to apply to Welsh Government to obtain consent for us to be able to grant the lease to Colley Gwent at less than market value. So that's essentially the arrangement that we need to make. But the critical date is we need to enter into the license to enable us to get into the site 18th of June. Otherwise, we run the risk of not being able to hit the date of September 2020, which is the most critical date for what we're trying to achieve. I think that's, in summary, that's what the report is seeking approval for. If there are any questions, I'm happy to try and answer.
Thank you. I think you should have a job as a lawyer, although you've explained things so so well that I think you'd not earn sufficient fees. I did have a few questions. They've all been answered. It's that 6-part process that appears quite complicated, but it's all necessary for things to fall into place appropriately. Do you want to come in at this point, David?
Yeah. I'm certainly not going to have anything to or attempt to clarify any further the contents of the report, because it is incredibly convoluted, but absolutely necessary as well for progress. So I welcome the report and indeed all of the hard work that's gone behind this. I also welcome the fact that the report, in a sense, clearly connects both Colley Gwent and us. It joins us, in a sense, in a very, very formal way. And this conundrum that you loosely commented on earlier on about they will operate it if we build it, and we build it if you will operate it, that is, in a sense, squared, that circle is squared by this particular document. I must say that there's a bit more to the partnership that we have with Colley Gwent than merely bricks and mortar and watching a building come out of the ground, as it were. There's, in many people's minds, there's probably more important issues like the partnership arrangements that will at the moment being talked about, being investigated, constructed. There's also the curriculum development and also the ALM provision, just to name 3. There's a tremendous amount of other work going on as well in terms of the partnership, and I think that needs to be fleshed out. It needs to be underlined that the partnership between us and Colley Gwent is significantly more than just bricks and mortar. We shouldn't ignore the fact also that we have a partnership arrangement with the Welsh Assembly Government, and it's been fairly productive, fairly effective thus far. I would just hope now that we've come to this kind of bridgehead, if you like, that we can urge Welsh Assembly Government to apply with a degree more urgency the notion of getting arrangements in place for the leasing of the ground in the college. And also, perhaps with a tad of urgency that doesn't necessarily exist at the moment, talk to Welsh Assembly Government about other uses that the land can be put to, the space can be put to, because we have ideas in that direction as well. It just remains for me to say that thanks to Veronica for skillfully prepping the way for an equally skillful presentation. You've made something incredibly turgid, manageable to digest, and we should be thanked roundly for that.
Any more contributions? One question I think is worth sort of expanding on for those perhaps watching. The issue of contamination is a fairly standard sort of thing that has to be addressed for any post-industrial site. So it's not anything that anyone should be alarmed by, and it's something that we will address as we would with any site that's being converted from industrial use.
Yeah, definitely. From a public health point of view, you couldn't put a use as we're proposing on industrial site without addressing the contamination. It would be unlawful to do so. So we're doing it for that reason. But also in the context of the well-being of future generations, we are bringing a brownfield site, which is not in use at the moment, into beneficial use, and a use that will help regenerate the wider area around this site. So it is actually, there is a greater benefit than just decontaminating and putting a college on it. There will be knock-on effects in the long run.
Thank you. Any other contributions? Well, I think it's another sort of report that seems quite technical and dry, but hopefully it's an important step along the way to successfully establishing a state-of-the-art facility for our young people, and I look forward to further reports as that comes to fruition. I'd also point people towards the social media and activity and press release that's gone out this week, asking people for ideas about naming the college, the site, and we welcome suggestions from members of the public on that too. So if I move to the recommendations then on page 34, that Cabinet approve the principal and provisional terms detailed in this report for the proposed acquisition of land at Grange Road, Cwmbran, in order to facilitate the construction of a new English medium sixth form centre, which will replace all current 12 and sixth forms in English medium schools. 12.2, that Cabinet grants specific delegated authority to the Executive Member for Performance Improvement and Corporate Governance to determine any other issues pertaining to the acquisition of the site of the new sixth form centre that may require member approval, and specifically the final price. 12.3, that Cabinet approve the entering into an agreement to lease and subsequent lease of the completed sixth form centre to Coleg Gwent, subject to the provisional terms contained in this report. And 12.4, that Cabinet grants specific delegated authority to the Exec Member for Performance Improvement and Corporate Governance to determine any other issues pertaining to the grant of the lease to Coleg Gwent which may require member approval. So are we happy to approve that, Cabinet? That's approved. Thank you, Victor. If we move on then to agenda item 8, which is civil parking enforcement. Now I hand over to Fiona initially.
Thank you, Leader. So Gwent Police have advised the Gwent authorities that they intend to withdraw from enforcement of on-street parking restrictions, those broadly controlled by signs and lines. They've confirmed their intention to continue with enforcement of other offences, including moving traffic offences, dangerous parking and driving over footways. Highways authorities have the ability to carry out enforcement of highway restrictions by applying and securing civil enforcement powers. Civil enforcement powers both have advantages and disadvantages for local authorities, so naturally these need to be considered carefully and have been by the 5 Gwent local authorities. Following the police's notification of their intention to withdraw, the 5 local Gwent authorities have been working together to consider the progression of civil parking enforcement powers, looking at a number of options and the business cases associated with those options. The report today summarises that work and suggests how the matter could be taken forward. I'll pass you on to Stephen Jarrett.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members. As Councillor Cross has mentioned, Gwent Police, who currently enforce highway-based restrictions, typically those looking at controlled by traffic regulation orders, are seeking to withdraw from carrying out that function, retaining other functions associated with other aspects of moving traffic offences and parking offences. So as I said, we have the powers as a local highway authority to apply to Welsh Government for civil parking enforcement powers. And again, and just to draw the distinction, the local authority or local highway authority would look to enforce those restrictions broadly controlled by signs and lines. So your typical WL lines, waiting restrictions, things like that. Other highway parking related offences would remain within the police's jurisdiction to enforce. The process is fairly complicated. It involves basically the highway authority making sure it has all its orders up to date, all its signs and lines on the ground up to date, which means the order can then be enforceable. An application to Welsh Government to seek the powers, along with at the same time thinking of how any scheme would operate, including how we would run the scheme in terms of back office functions and enforcement officer functions. When the notification came through from Gwent Police, senior officers within the Gwent local authorities worked together to look to see what options we could come up with. We commissioned an outside consultancy to look at the various options. There are a number of advantages to a local council in taking over civil parking enforcement powers. They include being able to enforce as we, as the council, see appropriate. We can also ensure that any highway schemes or any economic development schemes that had highway impacts associated with them would then be within our gift to take forward, as we saw. There's potentially improved compliance if we have a different regime to the police that they currently have, and potentially improved traffic flow and highway conditions. There are a number of disadvantages, though. They can include, certainly in our case, projected operational financial deficit associated with the cost of setting up a scheme. There's the perception of the public in any changes to the enforcement regime. If, for example, a local authority had a far more stringent regime than the police authority previously had, then that could be a reputational issue for that local authority. And obviously, with enforcement, it's a contentious issue. So if we were to employ our own enforcement officers, we have the risk of aggression towards those officers then. So picking up on 5.3, just to go through the options that we looked at. We looked at both in-house, as in authority, and collaborative types of operation. And they're detailed in 5.3 and 5.4. And then I go on in 5.5 to say what the advantages and disadvantages of those various options are. At present, the J options are really shown for completeness. They're options we considered, but none of the Gwent local authorities think they're in a position really to take forward collaborative options. Mainly because of the risks involved in setting up a complete new operation for each or any of the local authorities. So into 5.7, we pick up the costs of the various options that have been produced, and they range from a set of costs of 189k to 127k. Depending on the option, and that excludes a bit of project management resource. And then the revenue costs show a deficit of 45k to 11k for the same options in year 5. To highlight then in 5.8, Cabinet have previously expressed a view that option B2, which is local enforcement with a local authority back office, would be an option they may prefer. That certainly seems to be an option that is prevalent certainly across Wales. There's lots of examples where back offices are shared and enforcement is carried out by the local authority then. In terms of consultation, in section 6, the matter has been to scrutiny committee. Scrutiny raised a number of issues related to ensuring adequate communications and such things, which certainly we comply with and would want to comply with, should we take a scheme forward. A couple of issues that scrutiny raised that we may need to consider further are comments about joining together the potential enforcement of littering and dogfouling offences with civil parking enforcement offences, and note that committee preferred the entire option, an option of the entire scheme being in-house, both enforcement and back office functions. So touching on to risks, I suppose the main risk to the Highway Authority in terms of the efficient use of the network is if the police withdraw and we don't have any enforcement to cover what we need to cover to ensure safe passage of the network. You're going to have disruption on the network, potentially hazardous situations, depending on how people then choose to park in light of potentially no enforcement. Also, there's reputational risks if we do take on the enforcement powers. So with that, Leader, members, take you to a recommendation that you note the information in the report, and if Cabinet are happy, that we look to take forward an option based on B2, which is local enforcement, combined local authority back office, and then the Chief Officer, Neighbourhoods Planning and Public Protection, be delegated the powers to implement the scheme. Thank you.
Okay, any comments or questions from members?
Yeah. The police are handing over powers. Are they handing over anything else? Any resources come with it?
No.
I think in the recommendations is a good example of constructive use of reserves to fund the set-up costs. So that's a good thing. It's interesting, many times when this is discussed, both in here and outside, this was seen as a bit of a potential cash cow, but it's obvious from the report that that's not in fact the case, that it will likely run at a deficit. But I support the B2, the advantages of the in-house solution, as you've outlined. Do you think that the situation with neighbouring authorities is one that's fixed, or do you think that's something we can explore going forwards once the scheme's up and running?
I certainly think there's potential that, once the scheme is up and running, there's no reason that it would be set. I think, once the risks are sort of minimised and removed a bit, then I think certainly the local highway authorities would be keen to work together to certainly consider other schemes, and more collaborative schemes in the future.
Right. Anyone else? I move us to recommendations then. On page 49, 12.1, that Cabinet notes the information contained in this report and approves the progression of an application for a CPA/SEA scheme based on model B2 as described in paragraph 5.8 above, with the required financial set-up resource being made available from the general fund balances up to 163,000 for option B2. Revenue costs will be considered within the construction of the neighbourhood planning and public protection services. And 12.2, that the Chief Officer of Neighbourhoods Planning and Public Protection be delegated authority to implement the scheme, including all technical and legal aspects of implementation. We have a show of hands then. That's carried. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Fiona. We move on then to item 9, which is the local housing strategy, and I'll bring in Dave Daniels.
Thank you, Leader. So this is essentially our joint plan with all our key working partners for the next 3 years, outlining the challenges that we face, our aspirations to meet those challenges and how we're aiming to achieve them. The challenges that we face can't be understated. I know I've mentioned them in various different other forums, but they can't be mentioned enough. At present, we have 254, in the report it notes this, 2,544 applicants on the Home Seeker Register. Sorry, I was underplaying that by quite a lot. Last year, we saw over 50,000 bids placed on the affordable properties that we have in Torvine, which equates to about 58 bids per property, and that's on average. So many properties will have had over and above that. So that should give you a reflection of quite the challenge that people are facing to get a foothold on the affordable housing property. So in 2016 and 2017, we've had 877 households at risk of homelessness. They contacted us for assistance, many with complex needs, needing greater, more intensive levels of support. And of course, Torvine house prices are now 5 times higher than the average income in Torvine, meaning that home ownership continues to move further and further out of the reach of some first-time buyers. Bear in mind, we live in one of the cheaper places to live in the UK, so this should be of significant concern. And that these house prices are projected to rise even further, so this does pose a particular issue in Torvine. So those are just some of the challenges that we face, but of course with those challenges we have achievements. Our housing team continue to work incredibly hard to meet those challenges head on. In the last year, our housing service brought in £13.5 million worth of investment into the borough for new affordable properties projects, and over the past 5 years that figure was £65 million worth of investment generated by that team. And since 2012, our housing service and investment and the investment the team has brought in has seen 452 affordable homes built, 4,000 housed by the Home Seeker Partnership, and over 25,000 vulnerable people supported. So I think you can see there that investment in housing pays. Back to the strategy, I mentioned at the beginning that it's a joint strategy rather than a solely Torvine one. The housing challenges in Torvine are bigger than any one organisation, which is why earlier in the year we called a housing summit, where we invited all the key partners and fellow councillors and fellow cabinet members attended, where you were able to feed into the formation of this strategy. The document in front of you is the result of that process and the hard work that the team has put into processing the contributions from each of you and our working partners. And the progress against those priorities identified in the document is regularly reported back at the Strategic Housing Forum, which meets periodically throughout the year. And you'll note from 5.12 of the report that the annual operational plan will now centre around these key priorities. So I'll finish up by noting that this is not a statutory obligation to publish a public local housing strategy, or that we hold strategic housing forums to discuss progress against that strategy. And in fact, many councils don't do either. So the reason we continue to do so is that we, quite simply, that we recognise the fundamental importance of housing. And it's for that reason that I'm very proud to commend this report to you today. So I'll hand over to Elka to take any questions and cover anything I've not covered.
Thank you, Councillor Daniels. We've very comprehensively covered the report. So I suppose in brief, the last local housing strategy, which we had for a 5-year period, had served us really well. And there's some key stats on page 92 of your Cabinet papers, which sort of show the level of investment and help and support that our citizens have received through the work of the council, but also with our partners, because they're fundamental in the delivery of the local housing strategy. I suppose for us, Homes Matter, the new local housing strategy, we decided to do over a 3-year period with partners, because the pace of change is so fast, as we all know, that we felt that was more appropriate. The strategy itself is as an appendix to the actual report. That's on page 69 of the papers. And Homes Matters essentially is broken down into 4 areas: people, place, policy and provision, where really we're looking at the pressures for our housing customers, but also what opportunities. So each chapter of the strategy looks at what we want to achieve and how we want to achieve it. So key to the implementation of Homes Matters, assuming Cabinet approval, is we've started to develop an annual operational plan. That's been developed in consultation with the Strategic Housing Forum and partners who attended the Housing Summit. That was a very well attended event and went really well. So key will be the monitoring of ongoing of a number of actions to make sure that the strategy is live and is delivered, and really does ensure that people have access to homes, warmth, shelter, a safe haven, part of their identity, somewhere to live safely. So that's pretty much all I can add, I think.
Okay, any questions or comments before we go to the recommendations on the reports? I think the context that Councillor Daniels sets an important one, really, both in terms of the importance of housing for people's well-being, in terms of the crisis there is across the country, really, in terms of affordable housing and the demand that's there, and the availability of options for people. Even as you say, in areas like ours that tend to be, historically cheaper to live than other areas, there's still that big gap opening up between people's means and their availability and the availability of affordable housing. I enjoyed the Housing Summit. I thought it was a great example of lots of different organisations working together and talking about a common goal. And the more we can do that, I think the better. So if I move you to the recommendations then, on page 62, that Cabinet approve the new draft local housing strategy for Torvine. Will content to approve? That's great, that's carried. Thank you for all your work on this. Item 10 then is the award of the contract for Flying Start Enhanced Health Visiting Service with an Iron Bevan Health Board. If I can bring in Dave first.
Thank you, Leader. So this report is for the award of the contract for the Flying Start Enhanced Health Visiting Service with an Iron Bevan University Health Board for the sum of £905,146. Health visiting is one of the core functions of the Flying Start service. Following the award, a service level agreement is to be issued to the Health Board to outline what is expected of them. The service level agreement is based on Welsh Government guidelines for Flying Start and local knowledge of what is required to support the most complex families accessing Flying Start services. Each local authority across Wales works with their own health board for this element of Flying Start, as it ensures appropriately qualified staff, accurate patient records and established working practices with the generic services are maintained. An Iron Bevan University Health Board is the only provider of these services for Torfaen and are very much a partner agency in the delivery of Flying Start. So I'll pass over to Emma and I'll cover any questions that come our way.
Just a few points to note from the report. Flying Start's offered in certain areas of Torfaen. It's been running as a programme since 2007. As Councillor Daniels already touched on, there's four main elements of Flying Start, which are the childcare, the parenting, speech and language and the enhanced health service. The Flying Start grant as a whole is worth £2.6 million this year, and the health service take up 34% of that funding. All families with children under the age of 4 have access to a health visitor across Torfaen. The difference for Flying Start families is that the health visitors have a lower caseload, so they can spend more time with the family. The health visitors are also part of a skills mix team, so they can allocate work to other services as appropriate, and the skills mix team are listed on the second page of this report. Without Flying Start, there would always have been health visitors working in these areas, so an Iron Bevan University Health Board pay a percentage towards this health visiting salaries, and in Torfaen's case they pay for 4.1 work time equivalent of health visitors out of the 12.5 that are employed via Flying Start as a whole. The funding that we issue to an Iron Bevan Health Board is split as 849,146 on salaries and 56,000 on running costs. I meet with the health programme lead and their finance officer on a termly basis and receive monthly invoices from them. This so we can ensure that any identified underspends, we're told of those in a timely manner, and that money is not spent. It's as agreed in the service level agreement, it's clawed back and the priorities are reviewed. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval from Cabinet for the award of the contract of the Flying Start Health Visiting Service with an Iron Bevan for the sum of £905,146, and as already noted, the Health Board are the only providers of these services for Torfaen, and they're very much a partner agency in Flying Start.
Thank you. Any questions or comments before we move to the recommendations, Dave?
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Thanks to Emma and staff for this report, actually, and for the continued delivery of the service. I'll put out an invitation, and I put out an invitation at the seminar yesterday to any members who want to maybe shadow officers delivering the Flying Start service. I did that a few years ago, and it's left a lasting impression on me, really, because it is a very, very effective, very, very valued service. And my understanding of the value of early years has certainly grown exponentially ever since spending time with you guys out there. So I put an invitation out there to any Cabinet members or any other councillors who'd like to go out, because I think that early years is where our priority should be going forward, because it is the very definition of early intervention and prevention along the lines of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. On that, Emma mentioned that the Health Board fund a number of positions for our health visitors. I know the answer is unlikely, but I do wonder whether there's scope for greater investment via that, because members will note from 4.6 that We have essentially one midwife, one mental health nurse, one speech and language therapist, and one clinical psychologist, of which they all have limited sort of levels of capacity, and in some cases it's decreased over recent years. And all of these areas, so speech and language therapist, absolutely vital towards preparing children for school and giving them that equal start in school, and you know, the argument there is a very logical one. Investment would hopefully equate to capacity for greater sort of preparation for those children and greater attainment at a later age. Mental health is a fairly the argument's made for itself. I mean, investment in mental health going forward is essential. So all of these have benefits for us as an organisation, without a doubt, but they also have benefits for the health board. And I wonder whether there is an argument to be made there. And I can understand that they would make counter arguments, but I do wonder whether there's an argument to be made there for greater contribution from them on these particular areas, given that they are providing a significant prevention service to their demand that they're facing. And that for me is the principle of the Future Generations Act. And what we should be moving towards. So that's just a comment from me. I mean, you may or may not have that view as well, but thanks.
I agree.
Any others to come in? Yeah, Dave?
On the issue of trying to exact a little bit more out of the Iron Bevan Health Board, I would be all in favour of exploring that, and I just wondered whether or not we've tried to do this in the past. If we have, what kind of success? Well, we haven't had any kind of success, clearly, otherwise we wouldn't be in the pickle that we're in. But it seems to me that in this particular arrangement, the Iron Bevan Health Board have a strong hand, because they are effectively the only game in town. And we would indeed find ourselves in this rather ridiculous position of being in breach of contract if we didn't sign up with them. So it puts us in a pretty weak position in terms of trying to negotiate for more funding from them. But I think what we can do, we should do, and that is to press the case, because it's clear, if for no other reason, the benefits accruing to the United Bevan Health Board are equal to the benefits accruing to our organisation through this particular process. And I would say this in finalising, that when I talk to heads and teachers of schools, which I do fairly consistently, it isn't always the first thing that we talk about, Flying Start, but every time Flying Start is mentioned, it's mentioned almost in reverent terms. There is a great appreciation, certainly in primary schools, of the work done by Flying Start. But every good project has to have sound funding. And if there is a weakness in this system, it is in the funding. Councillor Daniels recited a list of anomalies, if you like, 0.4 of this, 0.4 of that, 0.6 of this. It is timely that perhaps an Iron Bevan should be engaged in more robust conversations about their responsibilities in respect of this particularly sound and solid project. And I just wonder, because we do have a representative on the Iron Bevan Health Board in the figure of the deputy leader, and I wonder whether or not we can press him or press upon him the urgency of perhaps talking at some length and in a robust fashion with the Iron Bevan Health Board to see what can be done. But I conclude by saying this, that we are in a weak position regarding a negotiation round, because they are the only game in town. It's almost a monopoly.
Firstly, perhaps I should ask the monitoring officer if I should be declaring an interest, given that I am a board member of the Iron Bevan Health Board, in relation to this particular report. But I take on board everything that Councillor Daniels and Councillor Yeo have said, and I think in terms of the Public Service Board and the Regional Partnership Boards, it is something that the Health Board, and I'm not a spokesperson for the Health Board at this meeting, do have to look at, because fundamentally areas which the Health Board can be funding, both on the Public Service Board and single issues that you're referring to, actually benefit the Health Board in itself, and it reduces the call on their facilities at acute stages later down the line. So to me it's a no-brainer, the same that we've invested in things, invest to save. I think it's totally appropriate there, and I certainly will be pressing those issues on the Health Board, and Alison and Anthony on the Public Service Board, basically looking for investment which is broader than Torvine to actually save the Health Board money. I hope that doesn't put me out of order, Monitoring Officer.
No, I think you've declared that interest and will be noted in the minutes.
Mandy?
Just come in and just agree with everything that both Davids have commented on, the pressures and waiting lists on speech and language, mental health news, later on CAMS. I think the extra input from Aaron Bevan is vital, and that's pretty needed, which will relieve the pressure later on in life.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Emma for her work on this, and Dave for his very apposite comments, really. I think the shadowing officer is one I'll be grateful to take up, and I note the points you make about early intervention, and this being the sort of the ultimate early intervention to help shape and improve people's lives. Certainly the funding issue is something that I can take up as part of the PSB, and I'll be happy to do so. With that, if I can take us to the recommendations then on page 110, that Cabinet approve the award for the provision of the Flying Start Enhanced Health Visiting Service with an Aaron Bevan University Health Board to the sum of £905,146 for 2018-19. Have a show of hands in favour? That's carried. Thank you for attending today. That's the last item, I understand, so have a nice afternoon.